What if I told you a Chevy truck engine, yes, a truck engine, humiliated Ferraris, Porsches, and Cobras on racetracks around the world? Not with sophisticated technology or exotic materials, but with something far more devastating, relentless, unbreakable torque that kept pulling when the pretty boys broke. And picture this. It's 1962 at Sebring International Raceway, the air thick with humidity and tension. Million-dollar European racing teams are unloading their purpose-built weapons, lightweight aluminum bodies, complex multi-cam engines, 5-speed gearboxes that cost more than most Americans made in a year. Then a privateer team rolls up with what looks like a parts bin special. Under the hood, a cast-iron lump that belonged in a pickup truck hauling lumber. The Europeans laughed. They stopped laughing 12 hours later when that truck engine was still running at full power while their sophisticated machinery littered the infield like expensive lawn ornaments. And this is the story of how Chevrolet's most unlikely racing weapon, an engine designed to haul hay bales and pull stumps, became the giant killer that rewrote the rules of endurance racing. The engine that proved sometimes the best race car engine isn't a race car engine at all. And then to understand why a truck engine could embarrass purpose-built racing machines, we need to travel back to Detroit in 1954. Chevrolet was getting its teeth kicked in by Ford and Chrysler in the performance market. Ed Cole, Chevy's chief engineer, had a problem. He needed an engine that could do everything: power trucks, motivate family sedans, and maybe, just maybe, give Chevy something to brag about on Sunday. But here's the kicker. He had to do it cheap. General Motors wasn't going to fund some exotic racing program. Cole's team started with a clean sheet. They weren't building a racing engine that could occasionally work in trucks. They were building a truck engine that might, if pushed, survive racing. The difference would prove crucial. The foundation was a 4.4-inch bore spacing, wide enough for serious displacement, compact enough for mass production. The block itself was cast iron, not exotic aluminum. Heavy? Absolutely. Indestructible? That too. Then the original 265 cubic inch V8 that launched in 1955 made just 162 horsepower. Compared to Chrysler's 300 horsepower firepower Hemi, it seemed almost quaint. But Cole's team had built something special into that modest beginning: growth potential. Those cylinder walls were thick. The bottom end was overbuilt. The oiling system could handle twice the stock power without modification. And then by 1957, they'd pushed it to 283 cubic inches. With fuel injection, mechanical Rochester units that cost more than some entire engines, it made 283 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch. In 1957, that was like breaking the sound barrier. But the real magic wasn't the peak power. It was how that engine made power. Lenin, the small block Chevy, developed torque from idle, not peaky, temperamental torque that required perfect gear selection and religious maintenance. This was truck torque, the kind that pulled tree stumps and hauled boats up launch ramps. From 1,500 RPM to 5,500 RPM, it just pulled. No drama, no temperament, just relentless, crushing force. Meanwhile, Ferrari was building jewels. Their 250 GT's Colombo V12 was a masterpiece of complexity. Double overhead cams, 12 individual throttle bodies, 7,000 RPM redline. It made beautiful noises and spectacular power when it worked, which at endurance races wasn't often. The valve trains would go soft after hours at high RPM. The multiple carburetors would go out of sync. The cooling systems, designed for European weather, would cook themselves in American heat. And enter Carroll Shelby. In 1961, the Texas chicken farmer turned racer had an idea so simple it seemed stupid. Take a British AC Ace Roadster, a lightweight aluminum body on a simple tube frame, remove its wheezing English six-cylinder, drop in an American V8. Not a racing V8, not even a high-performance V8. A truck engine, the same 260 cubic inch small block that Chevy's commercial division was putting in panel vans. The racing establishment was horrified. This wasn't engineering. This was hot rodding. Where was the sophistication, the breeding, the complexity that separated real racing engines from Detroit iron? Shelby didn't care. He'd watched too many races where the sophisticated European engines expired while cheaper American iron kept circulating. His philosophy was brutal in its simplicity. To finish first, you must finish. The Cobra debuted at Riverside in October 1962. It didn't win. The differential failed. But before it broke, Billy Krause had been running fourth overall, chasing factory Ferraris and Jaguars in what was essentially a home-built special with a truck engine. The Europeans consoled themselves that it was a fluke. A lucky run before mechanical failure revealed the folly of using production engines against purpose-built racing machinery. They were wrong, dead wrong. The secret was in the engineering philosophy. Ferrari's engines were designed to extract maximum power from minimum displacement. This meant extreme states of tune, compression ratios of 9.51 or higher, radical cam timing that made the engine unhappy below 3,000 RPM, valve springs wound so tight they'd lose tension after a few hours at racing speeds, bearing clearances measured in 10,000ths, perfect for power, terrible for longevity. The small block Chevy was the opposite. It was designed to survive teenage abuse, poor maintenance, and bad gas. The compression started at 8.1, low enough to run on regular fuel without detonation. The cam timing was mild, prioritizing torque over peak power. The valve springs were designed to last 100,000 miles in a truck, not 6 hours in a race car. The bearing clearances were loose by racing standards, perfect for surviving heat cycles and contaminated oil. When you put that truck engine in a race car, magic happened. Sure, it gave up peak power to the exotic engines. A worked small block made maybe 350 horsepower in race trim. A Ferrari V12 made 400, but power is nothing without reliability. And torque, real usable torque, is everything in endurance racing. Goodness, and let me put that in perspective. The Ferrari needed to be kept between 5,000 and 7,000 RPM to make power. Drop below that, and it bogged. Push above, and things started breaking. The small block? It made 300 lb-ft of torque at 2,000 RPM. It was still making it at 5,000. You could short shift it, over-rev it, lug it out of corners in the wrong gear. It didn't care. It just kept pulling. And then the 1963 season was when the truck engine myth became legend. At Sebring, the premier endurance race in America, the factory team showed up with everything. Ferrari brought their 250 GTO, $3 million worth of racing perfection today, already precious then. Porsche had their new 904, all aerospace engineering and Germanic precision. Jaguar brought lightweight E-types with aluminum blocks and fuel injection, and in the privateer ranks, a growing army of Cobras, Corvettes, and Corvette-powered specials, all running variations of that same basic truck engine, some with 4-barrel carburetors, some with fuel injection, some bored to 327 cubic inches, others stroked to 350, but all sharing that same fundamental architecture, the wide-bore spacing, the deep skirt block, the shaft-mounted rocker arms that never went out of adjustment. 12 hours later, when the checkered flag fell, the results spoke volumes. The overall winner was a Ferrari prototype, yes. But in the GT class, where production-based cars battled, Cobras finished first and second. Corvettes filled 4 of the top 10 positions. The factory Jaguars, retired with overheating, the Porsches, gearbox failures. The Ferraris that survived did so by nursing their engines, shifting early, managing temperatures. And the Americans just drove, flat out, hour after hour. And Bob Bondurant, who drove Cobras in period, explained it perfectly. The Ferrari guys had to think about everything, Oil temperature, water temperature, RPM, gear selection, they were always managing something. In the Cobra, you just put your foot down. If you could see the next corner, you were still accelerating. The engine never complained. It never overheated. It just pulled like a freight train until you ran out of straight but. The numbers tell the story. A Ferrari 250 GT engine rebuilt after every race cost about $15,000 in today's money. A small block Chevy? You could rebuild it for $2,000. If you needed to rebuild it at all, many privateer teams ran entire seasons on the same bottom end, just refreshing valve springs between races. And by 1965, the truck engine had evolved into something monstrous. Chevrolet released the L76 327, rated at 365 horsepower. With headers and proper tuning, 400 was easy. The L79 version, with solid lifters and a bigger cam, made 350 horsepower and would rev to 6,500 RPM reliably, still using the same basic architecture as the truck engines, still maintaining that unbreakable bottom end. Then came the ultimate expression, the 377 cubic inch destroked racing engine. Take a 400 cubic inch truck block, yes, the one from heavy-duty pickups. Install a 327 crankshaft. Now you had the torque of the big motor with the rev capability of the small one. These engines made 500 horsepower and would run 24 hours at Le Mans without rebuild. And the Europeans tried to respond. Ferrari developed the 275 GTB with a larger, more powerful V12. It was faster than the 250, it was also more fragile. Porsche went to flat 8s and eventually flat 12s, chasing power through complexity. They got power. They also got spectacular failures when those complex valve trains came apart at speed. And Renford tried to beat Chevy at their own game with the 289 and later the 427. Good engines, great engines even, but they never achieved the small block's combination of cheapness and indestructibility. A 427 Cobra was faster than a 327 Cobra. It also broke more often and cost 3 times as much to maintain. Here's where the engineering gets beautiful. The small block's valve train was primitive by European standards. Pushrod operated with stamped steel rocker arms on individual studs, no overhead cams, no complex roller bearings, just simple geometry that had been proven in millions of trucks. But that simplicity was its strength. And then when a Ferrari's cam chain stretched, and it would after hours at high RPM, valve timing went to hell. Power dropped. Eventually valves hit pistons. Catastrophic failure. When a small block's timing chain stretched, you lost maybe 5 horsepower. The engine kept running. You could finish the race and replace the $20 chain later. The oiling system was another masterpiece of simplicity. Ferrari used dry sumps, complex external oil pumps, and separate tanks. Sophisticated, yes, but one broken oil line meant instant engine death. The small block used a simple wet sump. The oil pump was internal, driven directly off the distributor shaft. One moving part, nothing to break. The pickup was at the back of the pan, perfect for acceleration G-forces. Even if you sucked air momentarily in hard cornering, the bearings were loose enough to survive. Cooling was handled by a simple water pump driven off the crankshaft. No complex thermostatic controls. No electric pumps to fail. Just a mechanical pump that moved more water as engine speed increased, exactly when you needed it most. The block had steam holes drilled between cylinders, preventing hot spots that killed head gaskets in other engines. Many of the heads themselves were revolutionary in their simplicity. The combustion chambers were wedge-shaped, not hemispherical like the complex Chrysler and Ferrari designs. This meant simpler valve angles, shorter push rods, more stable geometry. The ports were designed for velocity, not volume. They made torque at low RPM where truck engines lived. And the true genius appeared in the aftermarket. Because Chevrolet built millions of these engines, the performance industry exploded. Edelbrock made intake manifolds, Hooker made headers, Crane developed camshafts, TRW forged pistons. Every advancement was shared across the entire small block community. A development that helped a Corvette at Le Mans also helped a Saturday night racer in Tennessee. And NBI. Contrast. If you needed a part for your Ferrari engine, you called Italy. You waited weeks. You paid thousands. If you were lucky, it fit. The small block? You called Summit Racing. The part arrived tomorrow. It cost $100. Your local machine shop could install it. The racers figured out tricks. They learned that truck engines came with forged steel crankshafts until 1967, while passenger cars got cast iron. They discovered that certain head casting numbers flowed better. The 461 heads from 1961, the legendary Harse-Fuelier heads from fuel-injected Corvettes, the 202 heads from 1969 with bigger valves. This wasn't corporate development. This was grassroots engineering, racers sharing knowledge at track bars and in pit lanes. Then they learned about quench, the distance between the piston crown and cylinder head at top dead center. Too much and you lost compression. Too little, and you got detonation. The magic number was 0.040 inches. They discovered that small block responded to compression up to about 11.1 on race gas, 12.51 on alcohol. Beyond that, you were into diminishing returns. The connecting rods were another revelation. Chevrolet used forged steel in high-performance versions, powdered metal in trucks. Both were strong enough for 500 horsepower. The stock rod bolts were good to 6,500 RPM. ARP bolts pushed that to 7,500. Still using stock rods that cost nothing at junkyards. The camshaft was the heart of the transformation. A truck cam emphasized low-end torque with short duration and minimal overlap. A race cam stretched duration, increased overlap, moved the power band up. But even radical race cams in small blocks were mild by European standards. A Ferrari cam might have 320 degrees of duration. A hot small block ran 280. It gave up peak power but gained drivability. And racers discovered the engines liked to run hot, not overheating, but 210 degrees Fahrenheit. The truck heritage showed. These were iron blocks designed for work. The bores stayed round at temperature, the rings sealed better, oil pressure stabilized. European aluminum engines needed to run cooler, 180, 190. Their tighter tolerances couldn't handle expansion. The ignition system was bulletproof, points and condenser, later electronic. Nothing fancy. But it fired every time. Set the timing at 36 degrees total advance, forget about it. The Ferraris ran complex distributors with vacuum and mechanical advance curves that needed constant adjustment. Their exotic spark plugs fouled if you looked at them wrong. The small block ran common AC Delco plugs available at any parts store, and let's talk about one specific domination, the 1965 Nassau Speed Week. This was supposed to be Ferrari's show. They brought factory teams, professional drivers, exotic prototypes. The Cobra and Corvette teams were privateers running truck engines with 4-barrel carburetors. The Ferraris qualified faster. Their sophisticated engines and aerodynamics gave them the edge in single laps. But racing isn't about one lap, it's about hundreds of laps. Consistency, reliability, survival. The first Ferrari retired on lap 12 with valve train failure. The second lost oil pressure on lap 30. The third cooked its clutch, trying to keep pace with the brutal torque of the Americans. Meanwhile, the truck engines just ran, wide open, lap after lap, oil pressure rock steady at 60 psi, water temperature locked at 200. The drivers could focus on racing, not nursing. When the checkered flag fell, Cobras and Corvettes filled 6 of the top 8 positions. The only Ferraris that finished had been driven conservatively, managing mechanical sympathy over speed. The European press tried to explain it away. American tracks suited American cars. The races were too short to reveal sophistication. The drivers weren't pushing hard enough. Excuses. The truth was simpler and more painful. Their complex engineering had been beaten by truck motor simplicity. And then came the ultimate proof. Le Mans 1967, 24 hours, the longest, hardest race in the world. This was supposed to expose the truck engine as the crude tool it was. The Ferrari P4s were there, the Porsche 910s, complex, sophisticated, purpose-built racing machines, and in the GT class, a handful of Corvettes running 427 big blocks, literally the same basic engine architecture as Chevy's medium-duty trucks. Now, hour after hour through the French night, the truck engines thundered on. No valve adjustments needed, no mysterious misfires, no temperature management, just raw, unstoppable torque. When dawn broke, the Corvettes were still circulating at qualifying pace. One finished 12th overall, winning the GT class. It had run 24 hours at racing speeds on the same spark plugs, the same valve springs, the same bottom end that started life designed to haul grain. Ion and the sophisticates never understood. They kept adding complexity. 4-valve heads, overhead cams, fuel injection, electronic management. The small block racers just kept refining the same basic recipe. Better heads, stronger rods, higher compression, but always maintaining that fundamental simplicity that came from truck DNA. And by 1970, the formula was perfected. A 350 cubic inch small block with good heads, headers, and a proper cam made 450 honest horsepower. It would run a full season of Trans Am racing without rebuild. It cost less to build than a single rebuild of a Ferrari engine. It could be maintained by any competent mechanic with basic tools. And the legacy runs deep. Today, 50 years later, the LS engine, the direct descendant of that truck motor, dominates everything from drag racing to road course. The same basic architecture, pushrod-operated overhead valves, simple cam-in-block design, iron blocks in trucks, aluminum in performance applications, making 1,000 horsepower reliably with basic modifications. And the Europeans eventually learned. They simplified. Modern Ferrari and Porsche engines are far more robust than their ancestors. But they learned that lesson from being embarrassed by truck engines, from watching crude American pushrod motors outlast their engineering masterpieces. There's a beautiful truth hidden in this story. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most sophisticated. Sometimes it's not about what you add, but what you leave out. The small block Chevy succeeded because it was designed for the real world, for bad gas and worse maintenance, for teenagers and taxi drivers. That same overbuilt simplicity that made it perfect for trucks made it unbeatable in endurance racing. The Ferrari engineers designed for perfection. They assumed perfect fuel, perfect maintenance, perfect drivers. Their engines were faster when everything went right. But racing isn't about perfection, it's about survival. And nothing survived like a truck engine asked to go racing. And consider the math. A Ferrari 250 GT engine made 400 horsepower from 3.0 liters. That's 133 horsepower per liter. Impressive. A worked small block made 450 horsepower from 5.7 liters. Only 79 horsepower per liter. Crude by comparison. But horsepower per liter doesn't win races. Horsepower that lasts wins races. The Ferrari might make more specific output, but it needed rebuild after 6 hours. The small block would run for 24. The cost equation was even more brutal. A competitive Ferrari engine cost $50,000 to build in today's money. Annual maintenance might run another $30,000. A competitive small block, $10,000 to build, maybe $5,000 in maintenance if you were unlucky. That democratization of speed changed racing forever. Why? Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Racing was supposed to be about exotic engineering, about pushing boundaries, about sophisticated solutions to complex problems. The small block proved that sometimes the best engineering is the simplest. That reliability beats complexity, that torque beats horsepower, that finishing beats everything. And today, when you see an LS swapped anything dominating at track days, remember the heritage. That's not just a modern engine making big power. That's the direct descendant of truck engines that shouldn't have been able to compete. The spiritual child of cast iron lumps that embarrassed million-dollar Ferraris with nothing but brute reliability. The Europeans built racing engines that occasionally worked in cars. Chevrolet built truck engines that accidentally dominated racing. One approach required perfection. The other assumed catastrophe and engineered accordingly. In the chaos of competition, catastrophe planning beat perfection every time. The truck engine's racing success was never supposed to happen. It violated every principle of racing engine design. Too heavy, too simple, too crude. But it kept winning because it kept running when sophisticated engines expired. It proved that in racing, as in life, the tortoise beats the hare if the hare breaks down before the finish line. What makes this story beautiful isn't just the David versus Goliath narrative. It's the engineering philosophy it validates. That overbuilding for worst-case scenarios beats optimizing for best-case. That simplicity scales better than complexity. That accessibility and repairability matter more than theoretical superiority. The small block Chevy taught the world that racing success didn't require exotic materials or complex engineering. It required understanding the actual problem. The problem wasn't making maximum power, it was making sustainable power. Not peak performance, but repeatable performance. Not perfection, but survival. And when Carroll Shelby dropped that first truck engine into an AC Ace, he wasn't making a statement about engineering. He was solving a problem. He needed reliable power, cheap. The truck engine provided it. That pragmatism, that willingness to ignore convention and use what worked, changed racing forever. Yet the establishment never forgave the truck engine for winning. It wasn't supposed to. It didn't follow the rules. It didn't respect the hierarchy. It just kept running when everything else broke. And in racing, that's all that matters. Think about this the next time someone tells you about sophisticated European engineering versus crude American iron. Remember that crude iron dominated the most sophisticated racing in the world, not through elegance, but through sheer bloody-minded reliability. The truck engine won by refusing to lose, by staying together when everything else fell apart, by proving that sometimes the best race car engine is the one designed to haul lumber on Monday morning. That's the legacy of the small block Chevy. Not that it was the best engine, but that it proved a best is contextual. In a truck, best means reliable torque. In a race car, best means finishing. The small block did both because it was never asked to be something it wasn't. It was a truck engine, honest about its origins, that happened to embarrass racing royalty. What's the most unlikely success story you know from motorsports? The engine that shouldn't have won but did? The David that beat Goliath not through sophistication, but through sheer determination? Share your thoughts below. Because sometimes the best engineering stories aren't about complexity. They're about simplicity winning when complexity fails.